I never imagined a single signature could bring down the company we'd spent years building. But that's how it happened. Our vice president handed the future of Crestfall Innovations into the hands of his own brother, without legal review, without board approval. From that day on, I knew disaster was just around the corner. What I didn't know was how quickly it would all come crashing down on us. Charlotte, North Carolina always has a distinct summer scent. Sun-baked asphalt mixed with the aroma of coffee from downtown coffee shops. From my 25th floor window, I can see South Tryon Street pulsing, cars whizzing by, pedestrians hurrying, and glass buildings reflecting the dazzling afternoon light. Charlotte is a city with two faces, one gleaming downtown, one humble suburban face where working-class families struggle to survive. I came from the latter. My name is Marcus Hill, 32 years old, a finance manager at Crestfall Innovations. My father was a school bus driver, my mother a nurse. From them, I learned the meaning of hard work and the meaning of perseverance in an often unfair system. For me, Crestfall wasn't just a job, it was a way out of a life of limitations. A Charlotte-born financial technology company founded 10 years ago and now on the rise. We were developing a digital transaction security system, and with investors from New York starting to take notice, we felt like we were on top. In the office, I wasn't alone. There was Victoria James, the head of legal, a 40-something black woman with curly hair always tied back. She carried an air of authority every time she entered the room. Having worked at a top New York law firm, she had chosen to return to Charlotte to build something from scratch. She was assertive, intelligent, and nearly impossible to intimidate. Then there was Richard Collins, our vice president, a 45-year-old white man with a tailored suit, a silk tie, and a smile that could melt the most stubborn investor. Richard had a reputation as a masterful speaker, someone who could turn a skeptical boardroom into a standing ovation. But I knew beneath all that charisma lay a fragile underbelly. He was impatient, preferring shortcuts to process. The day started like any other. I was hunched over my desk, poring over the Q2 report. The numbers looked good. Revenue was up, operating costs were under control, and expansion to Europe was starting to become a possibility. Investors from New York were in the final stages of negotiations. Everyone in the office was moving with a light step, as if the future was already in their hands. Then a meeting notification suddenly appeared on my computer screen. Location, main conference room. Time, 10 a.m. The meeting title was simply one word: announcement. When I entered, Richard was standing in front of the projector screen. His smile was wide and confident, as if he had just found the golden key to unlocking the door to the future. Victoria sat in her chair, her arms crossed over her chest. Her expression suggested she had sensed something was amiss even before the meeting began. Richard opened the meeting theatrically. "Guys, I have some amazing news. We just signed a $50 million contract with a new vendor, Collins Solutions. They will be our partner on the largest data security project in Crestfall's history." The room was silent for a moment. The name was unfamiliar. I turned to Victoria and saw her eyebrows raised. She refrained from reacting immediately, but I could sense the tension in the air. Finally, she spoke. "Richard, I never received any legal review documents for Collins Solutions. How could such a large contract have been signed without due process?" Richard flashed a casual smile. "Trust me, Vic, this is a family company. I know them. They're trustworthy. We don't need to waste time with bureaucratic delays. Investors want us to move quickly, and this is the way to go." Those words made my stomach churn. Family company? Everyone in the business world knows nepotism is a ticking time bomb, but no one was brave enough to call it out loud. After the meeting broke up, I returned to my desk, my head full of questions. I typed Collins Solutions into a search engine. The results were thin and suspicious. A cheap website, almost like a free template. No clear portfolio. Their office address was on the outskirts of Charlotte,
in an industrial area better known for logistics warehouses than technology. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The contract that had entered the system made me even more suspicious. Their asking price was almost double the price of other vendors. The numbers didn't make sense. I took my findings to Victoria's office. Her room was filled with shelves of legal books, framed certificates, and the aroma of strong black coffee. She stared at the documents I'd brought with a sharp gaze, then sighed. If this company really is owned by Richard's family, then we've just violated every principle of good governance. But try saying that to the board. Without solid evidence, we could be accused of hindering a strategic project. I could only nod. True, my evidence was sketchy, but I knew something was wrong. In the following days, the atmosphere in the office changed. Whispers began to rise in the pantry. They say the vendor is Richard's brother. Why were they suddenly chosen? I heard their invoices were crazy. The IT staff complained that the new vendor never showed up to technical meetings. Invoices came in faster than the work was produced. The finance department, where I worked, was overwhelmed with sudden payments. I often worked late, staring at my laptop screen with tired eyes. Collins Solutions invoices piled up. $5 million, $8 million, $12 million, all with Richard's signature. Every time I typed that number into the system, a pang of guilt squeezed my chest. Richard, on the other hand, seemed increasingly confident. He walked down the hallway with a broad smile, as if everything was under control. Sometimes he would joke around with the other employees. In 6 months, this project will take Crestfall to the next level. Investors will be on their knees begging for our shares.
His words sounded like prophecy, but to me, they were a warning. One night, I sat alone in my office. It was almost 11 o'clock. The city of Charlotte glittered outside the window. Streetlights, tall buildings, cars still passing by. But on my desk were only papers, invoices, and anxiety. I closed my eyes for a moment. The same question kept coming to me. Should I fight back? If I spoke up, I could lose my job. Richard had immense influence, especially with investors. But if I kept quiet, Crestfall could lose millions of dollars and perhaps its entire reputation. It dawned on me then. I was standing on the brink of a storm that could destroy everything, my career, the company's reputation, and the futures of the hundreds of employees who depended on Crestfall Innovations for their livelihood. And that's where this story truly begins. Not with the successes we boasted about in our annual reports, not with the praise of investors, but with one reckless decision driven by nepotism. One signature, one contract, one family. That was the beginning of our downfall. Marcus Hill stared at his laptop screen, which was still on, even though the clock in the corner of the room had already struck 9 p.m. The office, usually bustling with the sounds of keyboards, phone calls, and employee chatter, was now silent. The only sound was the monotonous hiss of the air conditioner, mixed with the rustling of contracts scattered across his desk. His laptop screen displayed the website of Collins Solutions, the company he was supposedly planning to partner with, worth $50 million. But the more Marcus looked at the page, the more questions swirled in his head. The website looked like it had been made by amateurs. Cheap design, only 3 menus, none of which functioned properly. Even the About Us page contained only a single generic paragraph. We are committed to excellence and innovation. Marcus took a deep breath and scribbled a note in his small notebook. No headquarters information, no client list, no annual report. He felt something was wrong. The feeling intensified as he shifted the contracts lying on his desk. The figure of $50 million was displayed clearly, seeming to mock all the business logic he'd learned over the years.
Marcus wasn't one to panic easily. His background in accounting made him accustomed to details, to numbers, to finding small irregularities in piles of data. But this time, his unease was more than professional. He knew that if this contract went wrong, the entire company could be shaken. The glass door at the end of the room opened. Heels clicked firmly against the wooden floor. Victoria James, the legal director who had been with the firm for over a decade, walked in carrying a brown folder. Her curly hair was neatly tied back, her face serious, and her eyes immediately caught Marcus's. "Still here?" she asked, her voice deep and firm. Marcus smiled faintly, though his eyes were clearly tired. "I can't sleep if I'm not sure about this," he pointed to his laptop screen. "Victoria, have you seen this company before? Collins Solutions?" Victoria approached, placed the folder on the table, and leaned in to look at the screen. It only took a few seconds before her brow furrowed. "This website looks like a cheap template. For a $50 million contract, it doesn't make sense." Marcus nodded quickly. "I looked up their office address. It's just a P.O. box outside the city. There's no employee list. There are no financial reports. Even the phone number listed is inactive." Victoria crossed her arms, her eyes still glued to the screen. "This is a clear red flag. But," she lowered her voice, as if the office walls could hear her, "you know who signed this contract, right?" Marcus was silent for a moment. He knew. Everyone knew. Richard Collins, the company's vice president, and the man whose name was plastered all over the office. Charismatic, confident, and far too often acting as if this company were his own. Marcus swallowed. "Yes, I know. But if something is really wrong, we can't keep quiet." Victoria gave Marcus a sharp look. "If you want to dig deeper, do it carefully. Richard has many allies here. If he feels you're trying to take him down," she trailed off. Marcus nodded slowly, but in his heart, he had already made a decision. He won't stop. The next day, the office atmosphere felt different. In the modern glass-walled pantry, two young employees whispered, clutching paper coffee cups. Marcus stood nearby, pretending to pour coffee into his cup. "They say the company is owned by his own family," whispered a white man in a plain shirt. "Yes, his brother, if I'm not mistaken," replied a black woman in a red shirt, her voice held tight, as if she were keeping a secret. "That's why the contract was able to pass without legal review." Marcus held his breath, pretending to be busy stirring his coffee. The words cut like a knife. So the rumors had already begun to spread, even before there was any concrete evidence. He returned to his desk, carrying the coffee he had barely drunk. From his chair, he saw Victoria emerge from the meeting room with several other managers. Her gaze briefly met Marcus's, and with just a slight nod, she seemed to say, "We need to talk." That afternoon, Marcus ventured to bring up the topic in a small meeting. The room was brightly lit, sunlight streaming in through the large windows. At the head of the table sat Richard Collins, his navy blue suit always looking crisp and wrinkle-free, a confident smile never leaving his face. Marcus waited until the discussion was almost over, then said cautiously, "I just want to make sure we've done our due diligence on the contract with Collins Solutions. Some of the documents seem blank." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Richard. His smile remained unchanged, but his tone suddenly sharp. "Are you questioning my judgment, Marcus?" Marcus felt his heart pound. He knew everyone in the room was holding their breath. "It's not like that, sir. I just want to make sure there are no loopholes that could harm us later." Richard leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I've made up my mind.
Collins Solutions is our strategic partner. This contract will take the company to the next level. So, unless you have concrete evidence to the contrary, I suggest you stop wasting everyone's time." Marcus wanted to answer, but the words caught in his throat. Richard stared at him intently for a few seconds, before finally standing, straightening his jacket, and leaving the room with long strides. The meeting ended in an awkward silence. Victoria said nothing, but before leaving the room, she gently patted Marcus on the shoulder. The brief touch sent a clear message: "You're not alone." Marcus returned home that night with questions swirling in his mind. Richard's words from the small meeting kept haunting his mind. Unless you have proof. Proof. That's what he needed. The next morning, Marcus deliberately arrived early to the office. The Charlotte streets were still wet from the night's rain, and the sky was slowly turning from gray to bright blue. At his desk, he opened the contract document again, his eyes tracing each line, searching for any gap that might lead him closer to the truth. The company address read, Collins Solutions, 1827 North Pine, Gastonia, NC. Marcus typed the address into Google Maps, zoomed in, satellite view. He frowned. The location wasn't an office building, but a suburban residential area. No sign, no grand buildings, just simple houses with small yards. Marcus felt his blood rush. He knew what he had to do.
That afternoon, after pretending to go out for a client lunch, Marcus drove a rental car to the listed address. The road to Gastonia was quiet, trees swaying in the spring breeze. Family cars were neatly parked in front of small houses with wooden fences. Nothing looked like the headquarters of a multi-million-dollar company. He slowed down as he approached 1827 North Pine. His eyes were in disbelief. Before him stood a quaint, faded white house with dusty windows and a cheap wooden sign that read Collins Solutions, LLC. The sign even looked haphazardly nailed together, crooked and on the verge of falling off. There was no company car, no receptionist, only one locked front door. Marcus got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Oh my God," he muttered. He approached, trying to peer through the window. The shabby curtains were tightly drawn, but a small gap revealed an empty room with dusty carpet. No desk, no computer, no employees, just a folding chair in the corner. Marcus fired up his phone and quickly snapped a picture. 1, 2, 3. A cheap sign. An empty room. A house number. He knew this was more than a coincidence. It was a blatant scam. As he returned to his car, a neighbor watering her plants turned around. The elderly woman eyed him suspiciously. Marcus approached cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know a company called Collins Solutions lives in this house?" he asked politely. The woman chuckled, shaking her head emphatically. "A company? Son, the house has been empty for over a year. Someone just came in a few weeks ago and put up the sign. After that, nothing was there." Marcus swallowed. His head throbbed. The facts were like a hammer hitting his logic. An empty house, a new sign, a $50 million company. He thanked the woman and hurried back to the car. As the engine started, Marcus whispered to himself, "This isn't just carelessness. It's a conspiracy." A few days later, the company held an investor meeting in a luxury hotel ballroom in downtown Charlotte. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Round tables were neatly arranged, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air.
Major investors from New York and Boston attended, wearing expensive suits and calculating smiles. On the main stage, Richard Collins stood confidently. His navy blue suit glistened under the lights, his wide smile never fading. Behind him, a large screen displayed a presentation titled Strategic Future – Collins Solutions Partnership. Marcus sat in one of the back chairs with several other managers. Beside him, Victoria James crossed her arms, her expression stern. They both knew the truth Richard was hiding. Richard spoke loudly, his voice filling the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter. With Collins Solutions as our partner, we are securing innovation, growth, and profitability for decades to come." Investors applauded politely, but not everyone seemed convinced. One of them, a middle-aged man with gray hair and thin glasses, raised his hand. His name was Howard Green, a veteran investor known for being tough on questions. "Mr. Collins," he said, his voice deep and sharp, "where is the due diligence report on Collins Solutions? For a deal this size, surely we should see financial statements, assets, and client portfolios. May I ask where those documents are?" The room fell silent. All eyes were on Richard. Marcus felt his heart pound. This was the question he had been waiting for, but he also knew Richard's answer would determine everything. Richard smiled, albeit a little stiffly. "Of course, Mr. Green. The due diligence is underway. Our legal and finance teams have reviewed the essentials, and we are confident in the integrity of Collins Solutions." Marcus almost stood up, wanting to shout that it was a lie. Legal team? He knew Victoria had never been asked to do any review. Finance team? He himself had dug around and found only an empty house. But before he could move, Victoria gently touched his arm, signaling, "Wait, not yet." Howard Green didn't look satisfied. He stared at Richard for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Very well, but I expect to see full documentation before the next quarter. Otherwise, we will reconsider our position." The atmosphere in the room turned cold. Other investors whispered among themselves, clearly distrust beginning to grow. Richard continued his presentation with full force, but the atmosphere in the room was already different. For Marcus, it was the first sign that Richard's lies were beginning to crack in the presence of those in power.
The following days, the atmosphere at the office grew increasingly tense. Marcus felt like he was living with a shadow that constantly haunted him. He not only had photographic evidence of the empty house and the cheap sign, but he also witnessed Richard lying to investors firsthand. Marcus knew he had to act. One night, he drafted an internal memo for the legal department. He wrote it carefully, sentence by sentence, including all his investigative notes, the fictitious address, the cheap website, the fake phone number, and even the photo of the empty house. He titled the memo, "Urgent, Collins Solutions Contract, Due Diligence Concern." He sent it through the company's internal system, making sure to send copies to himself and Victoria. Afterward, for the first time in weeks, Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. He was confident that once this memo reached the legal team, the truth would have a voice. But that relief was short-lived. The next morning, Marcus opened his email, and the memo was gone. There was no copy in his sent items, no backup copy. It was as if the memo had never existed. Marcus felt his stomach churn. He immediately approached Victoria in her office. The legal office was filled with brown folders, tall shelves filled with dozens of documents, and the aroma of hot coffee. "Victoria," Marcus's voice trembled, "the memo, it's gone! I sent it directly to the internal system." Victoria stared at him sharply. "Are you sure you sent it?" "Of course! I even added a copy to my personal email, but it's all gone." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her face serious. "Then there's something bigger than just carelessness.
Someone deleted it, and only someone with high access could have done that. They stared at each other. Neither dared to mention a name, but both knew there was only one possibility: Richard. Finally, Victoria spoke softly. "Marcus, if you continue this, you'll be a target." He won't stay silent. Marcus clenched his fists. "I don't care. If we stay silent, this company could collapse. We have to find another way." From that day on, their alliance was officially formed. Marcus with his data-gathering skills, Victoria with her legal knowledge, worked together in silence. They exchanged files via flash drives, meeting outside the office, at a small corner cafe, at the public library, even in the building's parking lot. Each encounter was brief, filled with tension, but also built trust. In sunny Charlotte, two employees formed a secret resistance against their own boss. The day arrived sooner than they expected. One morning, a mysterious email circulated to all company executives. The subject line was terse: FYI, Collins Solutions ownership. Marcus opened the email with trembling hands. Inside was a PDF attachment, a copy of the complete contract, along with the company's ownership documents. The name displayed prominently in the owner section: Daniel Collins, brother of Richard Collins. Marcus could barely breathe. He turned to Victoria, who happened to be standing in the doorway of his office. Victoria's face was pale, but her eyes glinted with anger. "It's been exposed," she said simply. The entire office was in an uproar. Whispers turned to shouts. Employees huddled together, showing the email on their phones. Investors began calling non-stop, demanding clarification. The company's stock plummeted as soon as the news leaked to the media. An emergency meeting was held in the company's largest conference room. The tall glass walls reflected the midday sun, but the atmosphere inside was colder than winter. All the executives were present. Richard walked in briskly, his face pale, but still trying to smile. "Gentlemen, ladies, let's get this straight." Howard Green, a senior investor who had already been suspicious, stood up and threw a printed email on the table. His voice trembled with anger. "What's the meaning of this, Richard? You signed a $50 million contract with your own brother's company without legal review?" The room erupted. Some banged their fists on the table. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Richard tried to calm things down with a raised hand. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding. Daniel may be my brother, but Collins Solutions is a legitimate entity. They have the capacity—" "Enough," Victoria shouted, her voice cutting through the room. All eyes turned to her. She stood, her face straight, bold. "I am the legal director of this company, and I can swear to you, not a single due diligence document ever crossed my desk. This contract was signed illegally, and everyone in this room knows it was a serious violation." Marcus looked at Victoria with a mixture of amazement and relief.
Howard Green stepped forward. "Richard, you haven't just violated our trust. You've gambled with the future of the company on cheap nepotism. I don't know if this is a crime, but it's the end of your career here." Richard finally lost his mask. The fake smile crumbled. His face twisted into a taut expression, his eyes searching for allies. But no one supported him. Even the managers who usually nodded obediently now looked away, pretending to be busy with their notes. The room fell silent. Richard finally sat down, his face buried in his hands. For the first time, the man who had always been so confident looked small, fragile, and defeated. Marcus took a deep breath. All his suffering, all the sleepless nights, all the risks he had taken, they had finally paid off. But he also knew this was just the beginning of a long battle. Investors might still be able to save the company, but the scars Richard had left wouldn't disappear overnight. Outside the window, the Charlotte sky remained clear, as if mocking the storm that had just swept through the room. The next day, after the big meeting, the atmosphere in the office had changed completely. Normally, the executive floor was filled with light-hearted conversation, laughter, and the confident thump of footsteps. Now there were only panicked whispers and the sound of hurried shoes. Major investors began pulling out. Stock prices plunged more than 30% in just 2 days. The local Charlotte media ran the headline, "Nepotism Scandal, Collins Brothers Destroys Investor Confidence." Marcus arrived that morning with a heavy heart. While he was relieved the truth had come to light, he also knew a bigger storm lay ahead. As he walked to his desk, several fellow employees gently tapped him on the shoulder, as if to signal, "We know you're part of this." But no one dared say it out loud. On the other hand, Richard was no longer in his corner office. The blinds were drawn, the desk was empty, and only a red seal reading "Under Investigation" was stuck to the dark wooden door. The city of Charlotte had sent an investigative team to headquarters. Also present was an independent audit firm. The team was led by a 50-year-old black man named Detective Samuel Wright, a broad-chested man in a simple suit with a piercing gaze that could see through anyone. He walked through the meeting room with a thick folder in hand. "We will open all Collins Solutions contract records. Nothing can be hidden." Victoria greeted the investigation team with a stern face. "I will cooperate fully. All recovered documents are in the legal department." Behind her cool demeanor, Marcus knew Victoria was nervous. After all, she too was taking a huge risk by going against Richard. But now, with the authorities present, that burden was somewhat lifted. Within days, the audit team discovered that Collins Solutions was merely a shell company. No employees, no real assets. All funds transferred from the contract went directly into Daniel Collins' personal account. Worse, still evidence emerged that Richard used his position to manipulate internal systems to make Marcus's memo disappear. The digital footprint on the server was undeniable.
One afternoon, the investigation reached its climax. Richard was called back into the office to face the board of directors, investors, and legal team. The meeting room felt like a courtroom, only the bright white light fell on a long table strewn with documents. Richard entered, his face weary. His suit was unkempt, his tie loose. For the first time, the charisma that had captivated everyone was completely gone. Howard Green opened the meeting with a cold voice. "Richard, the evidence is clear. You violated not only ethics, but also the law. What do you have to say in your defense?" Richard was silent for a long time. His eyes scanned the room, searching for sympathy. No one met his gaze. Finally, he spoke softly, almost a whisper. "I just wanted to help my family. I thought if Daniel got a big contract, everyone would win. I was wrong." Victoria spoke loudly. "Wrong? You nearly destroyed the entire company. Hundreds of employees nearly lost their jobs. You covered up the truth, even manipulating the system to delete the whistleblower memo. That wasn't just wrong, Richard. It was treason." Richard lowered his head. The words were like a sledgehammer. Detective Wright stepped forward, placing the handcuffs on the table. The metallic sound echoed throughout the room. "Richard Collins, you are under arrest on charges of corporate fraud, nepotism, and obstruction of justice." There was silence. Everyone held their breath. Richard finally stood, his hands trembling as he was handcuffed. His eyes were blank, as if he couldn't believe his life could have fallen apart so quickly. As he was led out, the onlooking employees stood stunned. No one dared to speak. Several weeks passed. The company remained in crisis, but there were signs of recovery. The remaining investors were willing to give him a second chance, provided there was a major restructuring. Victoria was promoted to permanent chief legal officer. Her role in uncovering the truth was considered key to saving the company. Marcus, though just an ordinary analyst, had become a symbol of integrity. Many colleagues approached him quietly, thanking him for his courage. The board awarded him an internal award, the Guardian Award,
for those who uphold the truth, even at great risk. But Marcus knew the price he paid was not small. The sleepless nights, the dread every time he went home, and the near destruction of his career. Yet he also knew one thing: he wouldn't trade it all for a lie. A few months later, Marcus stood in front of the company building as the Charlotte afternoon sun reflected off the tall glass walls. Behind him, office life was starting to return to normal. People walked around with more optimistic expressions. Victoria approached him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Do you realize, Marcus, if it weren't for that memo, we might all be out of job?" Marcus smiled wearily, accepting the coffee. "Sometimes one small step can save thousands." Victoria nodded. "And sometimes one lie can almost destroy everything." They stood in silence for a moment, staring out at the busy afternoon traffic. On his phone screen, Marcus read the latest news. Collins brothers diverted to court, trial set for next month. He took a deep breath. This story wasn't over, but at least for now, the truth had found its way. The sky over Charlotte was a golden orange, a reminder that after the storm, there's always light waiting. Nepotism isn't just family favoritism. In the business world, it can be a time bomb that destroys the trust, reputations, and futures of hundreds of people. But the courage of one person, who chooses truth over fear, can turn things around.